Hi, my name is Christian Lash, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs. And I'm here to talk to you about the information worlds of LGBTQ plus ministers. So let's start with some basic definitions of these communities. LGBTQ plus is a large community of people who do not identify as strictly heterosexual and/or cisgender. Ministers are anyone who does faith-based work. This usually refers to ordained clergy, but it can also include those in other areas of leadership, such as evangelism, charity work, or working with faith-based organizations. So LGBTQ plus ministers are those individuals who hold both of these identities. So what does the literature say about the information behaviors of LGBTQ plus ministers? Well, not much. Most is focused on pastors or on Christians in general, and very little is specific to information behaviors. What little literature that does exist on LGBTQ plus ministers almost universally focuses on gay and/or lesbian clergy. A great article which rounded up the literature on LGBT advocacy in theological literature was published earlier this year. It gave a list of 77 items, which seems like a lot. However, nearly all of them are only about lesbian and/or gay Christians. None of them are specific to Christians who are bisexual, transgender, or any of the other identities encompassed in the LGBTQ community. Effectually, all LGBTQ plus identities other than lesbian gay are all but completely erased in literature which purports to be about LGBTQ plus Christians. The literature for and about ministry is quite interdisciplinary, covering sociology, counseling, geriatrics, social justice, race relations, and many other subject areas. In each of these disciplines, LGBTQ plus identities add a complicating layer, often requiring more study and articles specifically about that community. So in effect, the information needs of LGBTQ plus ministers span at least 3 areas of study, no matter what information they're seeking. There are some consistent themes across the disciplines. LGBTQ plus people look for information which affirms and supports their identities. There's also a lot of undereducation and sometimes even miseducation. This means professionals in these fields lack training and knowledge related to those who hold LGBTQ plus identities, which in turn leads to the erasure of identities referred to in the previous slide. This quote makes a nice transition into what LGBTQ plus ministers need. I could go to an LGBTQ plus affirming church in many places right now and say, give me a scripture that affirms me as a trans person. And the only thing they'll come up with is God is love. That's a wonderful sentiment, but it's not as nuanced as what the people who hate me have. We as trans people deserve better than that. We deserve theology. So what are the actual information needs and behaviors of LGBTQ plus ministers? It's important to note that what we see of ministry work is just the tip of the iceberg in what ministers actually do. We see the preaching, teaching, and some hands-on work, but what we don't see is all the background work of sermon prep, counseling, pastoral care visits, training, continuing education, and so much more. And that background is where the information seeking actually happens. It's also important to remember that no matter who we are, everything we do is filtered through the lenses of our identities. And that is just as true for ministers as it is for anyone else. Given the lack of literature, I conducted interviews with 2 LGBTQ plus identified ministers. Esther identifies as lesbian, sometimes queer depending on the audience. She uses she, her pronouns and is a former pastor in the United Church of Christ. And she's also Latina and bilingual. M identifies as queer or bisexual, non-binary trans person. M uses they, them pronouns and was recently commissioned as a deacon in the United Methodist Church, which is a big step along the path to becoming a pastor. There were a lot of common threads in these two interviews. Both worked within denominational structures. Both faced oppression, discrimination, and tokenization, leading them to create their own ministries. Both have a very intersectional focus on racial justice as well as LGBTQ plus struggles in the church. They both recognize and are highly frustrated at the fact that religious materials with an LGBTQ plus focus are extremely difficult to find, especially for trans and non-binary identities. And they both trust people with lived experiences in the LGBT plus community more than most other recognized authorities for information. There are some marked differences, however. Esther was working within a denomination with at least a stated acceptance of LGBTQ plus Christians and a policy for ordaining them, while M's denomination holds those identities as sinful. Esther left her denomination because of the tokenization she faced, while M is working from within their denomination to try to change harmful policies. Esther also has the added difficulty of needing resources in Spanish because of her focus on the Latinx community. I also read articles and in one case watched a documentary on two other LGBTQ plus ministers. Jay Mace identifies as a Black transmasculine person and uses he, him pronouns. He has backgrounds in both the Muslim and Christian communities and works as a poet and education consultant, often in faith spaces. He's currently working on a co-authored interfaith Black trans prayer book, which will create and examine a theology that tackles anti-Blackness, Black affirmation, transphobia, transmisogyny, as well as transliberation. Alex McNeil is a trans man and uses he, him pronouns. He is part of the Presbyterian Church USA and is the executive director of More Like Presbyterians, which is an organization working to represent LGBTQ plus people in the PCUSA. And they have a heavy focus on intersectionality and trans identities. He was also a part of a documentary called Out of Order, which is about LGBTQ plus Presbyterians who are seeking ordination. It's available for pre-screenings now and is set to be released in the spring of 2018. There are a few overriding themes in the ministries of all four of these people. All four do a lot of online and/or non-traditional ministries. They have all in some way created their own spaces, literature, and information for LGBTQ plus people of faith. While LGBTQ plus identities are the focus for all four of them, racial justice work and advocacy for other marginalized communities is very visible in all of their work. They all four seem to trust the community itself for information. Outside information for some of them is viewed with suspicion, hesitation, or even outright derision. For most of them, academic authority is still useful and somewhat trusted, but not as a primary source. The primary sources are the lived experiences of those in the communities to which they are ministering. As I went through the interviews and information, the theory that kept coming back to me over and over is the small worlds theory. There's an overriding reliance on the community itself to produce information. Savalainen's article on emotional motivation for information seeking also came to mind. There's such deep emotion tied to the work of each of these four ministers, and each of the four reacted to those emotions in different ways to ensure that their information needs are met. I was also reminded of the talks about trustworthiness and gatekeeping. There is little trust of information from those outside the LGBTQ plus community, and a lot of frustration at gatekeepers to information and inclusion. Each of these four ministers is working in their own way to get around the gatekeepers, or even to change or dismantle the systems which allow that gatekeeping. So what do we do with all of this knowledge? As we think about that question, I'd like you to put yourself in Esther's shoes with the needs she faced in her ministry. So you have been contacted by a mother looking for support for her and her teenage child. The child is gender nonconforming and does not have many affirming places. The mother contacted you after seeing an advertisement for an LGBTQ plus safe space at your local church. The mother and child are upset and looking for options because the school is trying to force the child into gender-based choices. The school's planning a trip and is splitting the students into binary gender-based groups. Neither you nor the mother can find much information on gender nonconformity, and what little you can find is only available in English, but the mother does not speak English. In this case, Esther really needed help from her religious institution. Unfortunately, that help was not received. So religious institutions need to have a focus on LGBTQ plus inclusivity and affirmation. Religious leaders of all identities need to become much more aware and educated about the needs of LGBTQ people of faith. Also, more literature is needed by, for, and about LGBTQ plus Christians in all areas. Esther also needed bilingual resources and resources on education and possibly even legal resources to assist this mother and child. So religious institutions can't stop at just LGBTQ plus identities, but they really need to become more aware and educated on the needs specific to their community and beyond to be in the best position to assist if and when asked. Esther may have been well served to speak to a librarian or even an educator at the school. Those professionals would need to have knowledge of the needs for interdisciplinary literature, especially for ministers and other people of faith. These professionals would need to be able to draw the parallels between the different areas of literature to assist Esther in getting all the information she needs. They would also need to be aware of and be able to assist in finding information in non-traditional but trusted sources, especially in online ministries. And just like the religious institutions, educators and librarians should be aware of the need for intersectional information to ensure the information speaks most directly to the need. In closing, I hope this has made you more aware of just how complex the needs of LGBTQ plus ministers are and the difficulties and barriers faced in finding what they need. I also hope you now have at least a couple of tools should any of them come to you for an information need. Here are a few sources for further reading, and thanks for listening.